They dazzled audiences with elegance, charisma, and unforgettable performances. But behind the glittering spotlights and polished magazine covers, many Golden Age celebrities carried tempers that could turn a glamorous set into a battlefield. Ever wonder how far some of these legends went when their patience snapped? From verbal firestorms to shocking on-set meltdowns, the stories are more outrageous than the movies themselves. Stick around, because the smiling stars you thought you knew hid tempers that could shake even Hollywood's toughest directors. Bette Davis. Bette Davis wasn't just a powerhouse actress. She was a storm in heels, a one-woman whirlwind whose sharp tongue became legendary both on and off the screen. When she didn't like something, the whole room knew it. Her co-stars often described her eyes as hypnotic, but behind them burned an intensity that could slice through anyone who dared cross her. Her battles with Warner Brothers executives were the stuff of legend. Jack Warner himself, a man not known for backing down, admitted she could drive him to the edge. In one famous standoff, she marched into his office, climbed on his polished desk, and deliberately dug her high heels into the wood while demanding better roles. For a studio boss used to absolute control, that act was both shocking and unforgettable. On film sets, Davis's perfectionism came wrapped in biting remarks. During All About Eve, she openly mocked a young Marilyn Monroe for her nervousness and late arrivals, reducing her to tears. When director Joseph Mankiewicz tried to defend Monroe, Davis reportedly fired back with a cutting dismissal, showing she had no time for what she considered mediocrity. And directors didn't escape her wrath either. When Edmund Goulding dared to suggest a different interpretation of a scene, she hurled a nearby telephone in his direction. Her most notorious rivalry was with Joan Crawford, and Davis didn't wait for Crawford's passing to show mercy. After Crawford died, Davis coldly remarked, "You should never say bad things about the dead, only good." Joan Crawford is dead. Good brutal, yes. But that was Davis. What makes her fascinating is that through all of this, she delivered some of cinema's most enduring performances. For Davis, temper wasn't weakness. It was her tool, her weapon of choice in a business where softness was devoured. And though Hollywood often labeled her difficult, she saw herself as unapologetically determined. In her own words, when a man speaks his mind, he's respected. When a woman does, she's called impossible. Davis chose to be impossible, and it made her unforgettable. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford represented a paradox. The poised star with dazzling gowns and immaculate posture, who, once angered, could unleash a storm that left co-stars and crew shaken. While fans adored her polished image, those working behind the camera often braced themselves for her unpredictable temper. Her rivalry with Bette Davis has become Hollywood folklore, but Crawford's anger reached far beyond that famous feud. On the set of Johnny Guitar, she clashed viciously with Mercedes McCambridge. Accounts from the crew suggest Crawford went so far as to gather McCambridge's costumes and burn them on set, a dramatic display of disdain that stunned everyone. For Crawford, grudges were not whispered. They were displayed in full view of the entire crew. Crawford's obsession with control fed her temper. She was notorious for inspecting her dressing rooms with white gloves. If a single speck of dust appeared, her assistants risked a full-scale tirade. One makeup artist recalled enduring a 40-minute scolding because her lipstick shade looked too orange under the lights. And during Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Crawford reportedly filled her pockets with heavy objects so that during a dragging scene, Davis would strain herself for real. The result? Davis walked away with a genuine back injury. Journalists didn't escape Crawford's rage either. Interviewers were handed typed sheets of forbidden topics, with the warning that breaking the rules meant instant dismissal. One brave reporter, who asked about her age, nearly got struck when Crawford hurled a vase of roses across the room. Yet, Crawford was a puzzle. While she terrified colleagues, she also answered fan mail by hand, cultivating an image of gratitude and warmth for the public. It was this contradiction, the public sweetheart and the private storm that made her such a complicated figure. Her temper wasn't just about anger, it was about power. Crawford demanded absolute control over her image and her environment, and when reality clashed with her standards, the fury erupted. In the end, her name became forever tied to both glamour and intensity. A star whose rage burned as brightly as her fame. Errol Flynn. On screen, Errol Flynn was the dashing hero every audience adored, the fearless Robin Hood, the charming adventurer, the man whose grin could light up a theater. But off-screen, that legendary smile often masked a short fuse that turned entire sets into danger zones. Flynn's temper wasn't just a spark, it was gasoline meeting a match. The trouble usually started with his heavy drinking, which often fueled unpredictable bursts of anger. During the making of The Adventures of Robin Hood, Flynn allegedly showed up in no condition to film. When director Michael Curtis tried to rein him in with mild criticism, Flynn exploded. Grabbing a prop sword, he slashed it through the air and destroyed an expensive camera. Instead of apologizing, he snapped, "That's how Robin Hood would have handled it." For the crew, it wasn't a performance. It was a glimpse into Flynn's unruly side. Flynn's behavior toward co-stars was equally troubling. Several women who worked with him described how his charm turned into hostility if they resisted his advances. Extras feared being alone with him on set, and fellow actors often saw their scenes sabotaged if they offended him. Behind the glamorous posters, there was a man whose temper cut through the illusions of romance Hollywood tried so hard to sell. Outside the studio walls, Flynn's rages became tabloid fodder. He was arrested multiple times for brawling, with one infamous incident at the Knickerbocker Hotel ending in chaos. Reports claim he tore through the hotel bar during a fight, causing thousands of dollars in damage. Warner Brothers scrambled to cover his tracks, sending in their fixers to pay off damages and keep stories quiet. What makes Flynn's case particularly striking is the way the studio system shielded him. He was too profitable to punish. Warner Brothers allegedly even kept a doctor on retainer to excuse his courtroom absences. For years, money bought him immunity, and his temper went unchecked. By the late 1950s, Flynn's excesses had caught up with him. His once chiseled face and athletic body were ravaged by years of indulgence, and the fiery temper that once fueled his swagger now seemed like a hollow performance. He died at just 50, leaving behind a career of swashbuckling glory and a reputation for volcanic outbursts that made him as feared as he was adored. Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin looked every inch the tough guy on screen, square-jawed, gravel-voiced, a man who could silence a room with just a glare. What audiences didn't realize was that Marvin's explosive temper was no act. It was real, raw, and born from scars he carried long before Hollywood ever called. Before fame, Marvin fought in the Pacific with the U.S. Marines during World War II. Those experiences left him with both heroism and demons he couldn't shake. When he stepped into Hollywood, the battlefield seemed to follow him. His temper, fueled by alcohol and a hair-trigger impatience, made working with him an unpredictable gamble. During The Dirty Dozen, Marvin's fury reached a peak. When a cameraman questioned his position for a shot, Marvin reportedly snapped without warning. He threw a punch that broke the man's nose, halting production and forcing the crew to bring in a replacement. It wasn't a staged fight scene. It was the real thing, and it left everyone shaken. Co-stars didn't escape either. While filming Cat Ballou, Marvin allegedly threatened Jane Fonda during a heated argument, warning her to stop giving him acting tips or risk being thrown off a moving train. Fonda later compared the experience of working with him to standing next to a live grenade with the pin half pulled. That line summed him up perfectly. A man whose unpredictability terrified those around him. Directors learned to work around his volatility. On The Wild One, director Laszlo Benedek reportedly filmed Marvin early in the mornings, hoping he'd be more manageable before drinking set in. When even that didn't work, doubles often stepped in to cover scenes Marvin couldn't handle. His talent was undeniable, but his temper made every day on set a calculated risk. Yet, beneath the explosions, Marvin carried a strange self-awareness. After one outburst on the set of The Killers, he broke down, confessing to Don Siegel, "I don't know who that person is, but he scares me too." That moment revealed the tragic side of his temper. It wasn't just about rage, but a man haunted by his own shadow. Still, directors kept hiring him. Why? Because when he was in control, his performances had a raw authenticity that no one else could match. His Oscar-winning role in Cat Ballou proved his brilliance. But behind the awards, Marvin's temper remained legendary, a reminder that Hollywood's brightest stars often carried the darkest storms inside. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas was one of Hollywood's most commanding leading men. With his cleft chin, piercing blue eyes, and raw charisma, he could own the screen with a single glare. But behind that magnetic presence lurked a temper so ferocious that entire crews would scatter the moment his voice rose. Douglas didn't just demand perfection, he demanded obedience. And when he didn't get it, sparks flew. The most famous example came during the production of Spartacus. Douglas not only starred in the film, he also used his clout to oust director Anthony Mann and bring in the young Stanley Kubrick. That move alone showed his hunger for control. But Kubrick soon discovered he had a volcano for a star. Their clashes became legendary. Douglas reportedly screamed tirades so vicious that Kubrick directed many scenes from a distance, using assistants as messengers to avoid direct confrontations. Imagine being so intimidating that Stanley Kubrick himself chose to stand back. Douglas's fury didn't stop at directors. While filming The Vikings with Tony Curtis, Douglas allegedly lost patience with his co-star's performance. In a fit of rage, he hurled a battle axe at him, missing his head by inches. When Curtis complained, Douglas chillingly warned, "Next time I won't miss." That kind of intensity wasn't just theatrical, it was dangerous. His habit of taking over scenes was equally notorious. On Paths of Glory, he once stopped mid-take, pointed directly at Kubrick, and shouted, "You're doing it wrong," before proceeding to direct the scene himself. The crew froze, torn between following the director or the star. It was mutiny on set, and Douglas relished every second of control. What makes Douglas fascinating is how his temper eventually got reframed. Over time, critics called it passion, dedication, and perfectionism. In his later years, Douglas himself brushed off the stories, saying, "I've had to be strong to survive. If that makes me difficult, so be it." For many who endured his volcanic rage, the word difficult was an understatement. Orson Welles. Orson Welles was the boy wonder who stormed Hollywood at just 25, creating Citizens Kane, a film still hailed as one of the greatest ever made. But his brilliance came wrapped in a temper that was just as legendary as his talent. Welles didn't throw fits. He launched campaigns of destruction when things didn't go his way. During the filming of The Lady from Shanghai, Welles erupted when a lighting setup displeased him. In full view of the crew, he hurled a chair straight through a delicate set wall, causing thousands in damage. When producers demanded he cover the cost, Welles coolly replied, "Bill me for the chair, not your shoddy wall." That response captured everything about him: arrogant, sharp, and unwilling to bow to authority. His pursuit of perfection often crossed into cruelty. While directing Macbeth, he forced actress Jeanette Nolan to repeat a sleepwalking scene 87 times. By the end, she was exhausted, her voice ragged, and her tears real. Welles simply smiled and said, "Now you understand, Lady Macbeth." For him, torment was just another tool to get the performance he wanted. But it wasn't only actors who felt his fury. When RKO executives began re-editing the magnificent Ambersons behind his back, Welles unleashed a barrage of threats, telegrams promising lawsuits, shouting matches, and even physical confrontations. One editor claimed he had to be physically restrained from lunging at him during an argument. His temper, like his art, had no boundaries. The tragedy of Wells is that his volcanic personality eventually cost him everything. Studios grew tired of his antics, and doors began to close. By the 1950s, the man who had once been the golden child of cinema was reduced to scraping together funds through small acting jobs and commercials. Even as his star faded, Wells never softened. Reflecting later, he admitted, "I've spent too much of my life fighting executives who think they're artists." It was both his rallying cry and his downfall. His temper was inseparable from his genius, and it burned through the very empire he built. James Cagney. James Cagney carved out his fame playing gangsters who ruled the streets with fists and fury. Audiences loved his quick temper and rapid-fire delivery. But off-screen, Cagney's explosions weren't scripted. They were all too real. If a director, co-star, or even a photographer crossed him, they risked seeing the same fire that made him a legend. His clashes with Warner Brothers became industry gossip. Cagney frequently walked off sets mid-shoot, defying contracts and forcing executives to chase him down. The boldest moment came during a heated showdown with studio head Jack Warner. Cagney reportedly grabbed Warner by the collar, lifted him partially off the ground and snarled, "Don't ever talk to me like that again." For anyone else, that move would have ended a career. For Cagney, it only reinforced his reputation as the man who wouldn't be pushed around. On set, his perfectionism made him both inspiring and terrifying. During Angels with Dirty Faces, he grew so frustrated with co-star Pat O'Brien that he publicly tore apart his performance, reducing him to tears. When director Michael Curtis tried to intervene, Cagney dismissed him coldly, saying, "If you want this picture to work, keep him away from me until he learns his craft." That wasn't just temper. It was an actor reshaping a production with sheer force of will. Cagney's temper wasn't limited to professional disputes. In one infamous incident, he noticed a photographer snapping pictures of him at a restaurant. Furious at the intrusion, Cagney reportedly chased the man for 3 blocks, finally catching him and smashing his camera. When asked about it later, Cagney shrugged, "I don't like people taking liberties." What set Cagney apart was his precision. Unlike stars who lashed out at everyone, his temper was selective, aimed at those he felt had disrespected him or failed to meet his standards. To actors who earned his respect, he was generous and loyal. To those who didn't, he was a nightmare. Cagney himself summed it up best. "I fought all my life. Not with fists, but with my work." For those who crossed him, though, the fists sometimes showed up too. Charles Laughton. Charles Laughton was a genius of the screen, a man who could vanish into roles so completely that audiences forgot they were watching an actor. But that brilliance came at a price. His temper, slow to ignite, erupted with terrifying precision. If Bette Davis was a thunderclap, Laughton was a gathering storm, darkening the air until everyone around him knew the eruption was coming. On the set of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the heavy prosthetics and grueling hours left Laughton seething. Crew members recalled how he locked himself in his dressing room for nearly 2 days, threatening to abandon the film entirely. When makeup artist Perk Westmore tried to coax him out, Laughton hurled a heavy kit straight at his head. For Westmore, it was a brutal reminder that this star's artistry came with dangerous volatility. Jealousy also fueled his rage. During witness for the prosecution, Laughton became convinced that director Billy Wilder favored Marlene Dietrich. In a chilling move, he struck Dietrich hard during a scene, leaving her with a real bruise. When Wilder confronted him, Laughton coldly replied, "Now she'll understand her character's fear." That wasn't just temper. It was cruelty masked as method acting. Directors dreaded his psychological games. Instead of screaming fits, he preferred to dismantle colleagues with words. David Lean recalled watching Laughton reduce a young actress to tears by spending an hour dissecting every flaw in her technique, only to later admit he'd done it to get the performance he wanted. For Lawton, torment wasn't a byproduct. It was part of his process. And yet, those who endured him witnessed greatness. His Captain Bligh in Mutiny on the Bounty, and his complex lawyer and witness for the prosecution remain masterclasses in performance. As Alfred Hitchcock once said, working with Charles is like trying to harness a thunderstorm. Dangerous, unpredictable, but unforgettable. Buster Keaton. Known as the Great Stone Face, Buster Keaton built his career on silent comedy, his deadpan expression unshaken through pratfalls, stunts, and chaos. But behind that stoic mask lay a temper so rare and explosive that when it erupted, it stunned everyone who witnessed it. Unlike other stars who simmered constantly, Keaton's rage was infrequent. But when it broke through, it was like watching a dam collapse. During the making of The General, his ambitious Civil War epic, repeated technical problems finally cracked his legendary composure. Witnesses described him calmly, picking up a sledgehammer and methodically smashing the entire set piece by piece, his face expressionless the entire time. For 30 straight minutes, no one dared intervene. It was as if his screen persona, the man who faced collapsing houses and runaway trains without flinching, had finally let all the frustration out at once. His clashes with MGM executives became infamous. The studio, determined to rein in his creativity, rejected one of his projects outright. Keaton's response? He picked up a heavy chair and hurled it straight through the executive's office window from the 14th floor. When security arrived, they found him sitting calmly, as if nothing had happened. Even in his darkest years, Keaton's temper shocked those around him. Struggling with declining fame and personal troubles, he once destroyed an entire hospital room during detox, ripping a radiator from the wall with his bare hands. For a man of his size, it seemed impossible, but that was the paradox of Keaton. Quiet until he wasn't, mild until he exploded. What made his anger different was that it was rarely directed at people. His fury was aimed at obstacles, broken cameras, interfering executives, or the machinery of the studio system. It was as though his patience could weather anything, until art itself was threatened. Then the storm hit, and even Hollywood's toughest executives backed away. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was the epitome of glamour, a star whose beauty captivated audiences across the globe. But behind those famous eyes burned a temper that could turn elegance into pure fire. If someone crossed Gardner, they didn't get a cutting remark. They got the full force of her fury, delivered in a storm that people still talk about. On the set of Mogambo with Clark Gable, director John Ford criticized her performance. Gardner didn't argue quietly. She flipped an entire makeup table, sending bottles, brushes, and mirrors crashing to the ground. When Ford demanded an apology, she shot back, "When hell freezes over." Even the famously tough Ford knew better than to push her further. Her showdowns with MGM's Louis B. Mayer were legendary. During one contract negotiation, Mayer tried to shame her for her personal life. Gardner unleashed a tirade so sharp and profane that even Mayer, who had gone toe-to-toe with countless stars, was left speechless. Witnesses said he looked like a man who'd just been hit by a hurricane. Her fiery temper carried into her personal life as well. During her tumultuous marriage to Frank Sinatra, their hotel fights often became public spectacles. In Rome, she famously threw his luggage and his prized record collection off an 8th-floor balcony. Security had to intervene, but for Gardner, it was just another night of passion turned to rage. What made Gardner's fury unforgettable was her refusal to apologize for it. When Howard Hughes made unwanted advances, she reportedly slapped him so hard he needed medical attention. Her own comment afterward? She said she was simply teaching manners to the mannerless. That was Ava, unapologetic, unfiltered, and completely unafraid. In the end, her temper only added to her legend. She wasn't just a glamorous star. She was a force of nature. People who crossed her learned quickly. Ava Gardner was not to be underestimated. Hollywood's brightest stars often carried the darkest tempers, leaving chaos as unforgettable as their performances. But were they passionate geniuses or simply unchecked divas? That's for you to decide. Which temper shocked you most? Share your thoughts below, hit like, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories. The Golden Age glittered, but its shadows burned just as fiercely.